Okay, so first here I hit the sawmill. I bought a bunch of maple. I bought some other woods too, some walnut and poplar for other projects. But I bought a bunch of maple for this project, for the top, and it's pretty rough. And we're gonna start to mill it up. So as most projects, we start with cutting the rough length. This is the top. This is 5/4 maple, and we start at the miter saw typically, and then we will move to the jointer, planer, and also table saw to get our straight edges for glue up. These boards are not very straight, so I have my work cut out for me. So as you see here, I'm going to joint one face on each board, and then I'm going to joint one edge. So I did forget to have the camera on for the table saw, but I just went through the other edge of each board and just trimmed it real quick just to get two straight edges. Even though they're not perfect yet, but we're going to keep working on these. All right, time to cut the frame up. So here I'm going to start cutting the frame up. So I'm going to be moving around a lot with this. So what I'm doing is I'm going to be going back and forth between the frames because I'm also going to be building one table. And it's a pretty wide table for a dining room table for my standards. The dimensions are going to be 50 inches long and about 45 inches wide. So it's not as long as my typical tables, but it's definitely wider. And it's going to have two matching benches. The frames are pretty much the same process. Cut the length, then I will get a face and an edge on the jointer, and then I'll run through the planer. These I don't really have to run through the table saw. It's just the jointer and planer do a pretty good job of getting rid of the round edges and smoothing out the thickness that I like. Okay, so here I'm going to be laminating up these 2x4s that are plain down to the thickness I like on each piece. So I'm going to be laminating two together for the legs. So this order, like I said, is going to be jumping around a little bit. The normal, since I'm going to let the laminations kind of dictate how I go in order here, because why these dry overnight, then I'll start working on the top again and also the frame pieces. Now I'm going to go back to cutting some of the frame pieces. This will be the stretchers and aprons for this table. This also includes some of the bench frame pieces too with the legs. I have to laminate them. They will be 2x3, so I'm going to cut everything up now as much as possible. So now the legs are laminated and dry, the glue's dry, so now I'm going to take them out of clamps and run them through the thickness planer a couple more times just to get them to the final thickness. Now here I'm going to cut the legs to final length after they're all milled up. So this is one of the last steps for these legs. For the table, I have to repeat the same steps for two benches, but smaller dimensions. Now here, like all of my frame, leg, stretchers, apron pieces, I run a slight chamfer on each edge. On the legs, I run on all four sides, and on the aprons and stretchers, usually just the bottom showpiece of the apron and stretcher. And I put a little chamfer. So I'm just using a little router table here to do that. Okay, so now it's time to cut the apron and stretcher pieces for the top. And these will be 2x4 that will mill up to make it smooth as possible. So this is the step now. I'm just going to cut these to rough length, and then we will run the same steps we did for the legs, essentially, without laminating, obviously. So here's where I'm going to be marking my spots where I will be putting the dominoes for this table, and also both benches. I will be using the floating mortise and tenon joinery. So I'm just going to mark where I want my two dominoes to go on each edge grain and also into each side grain on the legs. And like all jewelry, even pocket holes or dowels, I like to have a reveal on all of my pieces from frame to leg. So I have to use these little spacers here, if you notice, on the table, just to kind of add them into the measurements of my mortise. I also, when I put my mortises in on the leg side, I leave one of the mortises a little wider than the other, so I have a little room to move uh, the frame pieces with the legs in case they're not exactly perfect, which is a common practice with using floating tenons and mortises, and this will help me just get everything in place and level up and be able to do a good glue up. I also like to do a dry fit. Well, obviously, before you do a glue up, you always want to do that. Make sure everything fits perfectly, and then you glue up, clamp. So for these side stretchers and legs, I'm going to glue these up and put these together and let them dry overnight before I attach the side aprons, top and bottom, or top aprons to the legs. So we will mortise them in the time being. But this is where I just do the sides right now and let them glue up, have that glue surface dry overnight. Okay, so now it's the next day, and the side stretchers and legs have been glued up overnight. So now I am going to mortise for the aprons to the legs now. So this is going to be sort of towards the final stretch of this table assembly. I'm also using a 50 millimeter by 10, 10 by 50 millimeter dominoes for this. So I'm using the biggest dominoes you could use with the 500. I didn't show this on camera, but the domino joiner has a bottom bracket you can put on that helps with plunge mortise cuts like this. So it definitely helps to keep your domino nice and level as you plunge in. Now we're ready for final glue up for this table. So now we are going to attach the aprons for each side to the legs and stretchers on the sides. So this is the final glue up. This will make or break pretty much this whole project. Also here, I just make sure I get the glue into these mortise slots real good. You want to almost over glue, and I also put it just a little bit on the edges too, just when I clamp them, I get a little more glue surface. So it's really important. I'm not going to get too detail of how to use a domino joiner. That's not what this video is. Um, it's even a new tool to me, so I'm still not a master of any tool at this point. But this is what I'm using for this joinery, and so far it's going together pretty good. It's just got to be patient, and it goes together like a big puzzle. But like I said, you want to make sure you get that glue and those slots real good. Almost over glue it. Also, you'll see here, I'm making a mistake when I put this together. I always make mistakes. I'm not perfect. One is I don't have my brush here for this glue up. I have a brush for these, and I just was too lazy to look for it. So I just use a little piece of wood to put the glue into the slots. But more importantly here, I'm putting this final assembly together, and I forgot the middle bracket pieces that I use. I use two pieces to go across the center of the table to help fortify and keep everything leveled and not from bowing. And I forgot those mortise holes in the side here, as you see. So the table's kind of together, so you can see I'm going to have to go and put pocket screws for these little middle brackets. Otherwise, the table went together pretty well. I measured diagonally across point to point, corner to corner, and the measurements were on point. So it went together well otherwise. So I just will have to address this a little bit later, as you'll see. Just put the little middle brackets in with pocket screws. It's not the end of the world, but it's just something I forgot. So I'll be doing that later, you'll see. Here's where I start bouncing around again. So now I'm just cutting some more of the top pieces. Just finish milling them up, and I'm going to start building the bench pieces now too for the legs. So I can start laminate them, let them sit overnight, and do the frame pieces for that the next day. So I'm kind of bouncing around here, but I'm just trying to work around this lamination and glue ups. So the bench, I'm not going to get too much detail. So right now I'm doing the same steps. I didn't even show the lamination, I don't believe, for the legs for them, since it was the same steps I did for the legs for the table. So now I'm just going to put my mortises in and use dominoes again for the benches. And this time I don't forget the middle bracket for the center piece. So I'm just going to kind of speed through this part, since it's kind of the same steps as the table, just rinse and repeat for the most part. So here I'm bouncing back to the middle brackets for the table as I wait for the legs to laminate for the bench. So I'm kind of, like I said, bouncing around a lot with this project. So here I'm just cutting some little corner bracket pieces for the table, just to help secure and tighten everything up, and also helps square everything up. So I'm just putting these little 45-degree cuts on these little blocks here that I will screw in, or first I will countersink and then screw in to the frame pieces of the table in all four corners. Here I'm just countersinking and using, I think they're 1.5-inch trim head screws here. They're a little smaller and thinner diameter, which are perfect. That way you don't take a chance of splitting these little blocks, and just kind of holds them in and squares up the table. Okay, so now I'm bouncing back to the benches here, as you can see. So I have 2 benches to build, and now I'm just going to start connecting these benches and getting these ready for final assembly. Also, one thing to take note of with the domino joiner is when you mark your spots where you're going to be putting the dominoes in, you want to make sure you reference around the whole piece of wood. In other words, on the other sides and the face of it, because that is where you'll see your dial for your domino. So you want to make sure that those lines are perfect. So off camera, I already dry fitted these side stretchers for these benches. So now I'm going to glue up and just attach the side stretchers to the legs now. And then we'll do the aprons the next morning. So here I don't forget to put the center bracket piece in for both benches. So this went together pretty well. It's like a big puzzle, and I was really satisfied. Just so you don't truly need to use dominoes for this. You could use a good dowel jig. Dowels work very well, and I use them a lot for projects like this, especially smaller tables. I think the domino is probably better for bigger tables because it's a more glue surface and bigger tenons. You could use different sizes and depths, where the dowels you're a little more limited. But the dowels do definitely work, and it's a cheaper tool to use. You could get like a good jig for $40 or whatever, or even cheaper. Even Grizzly makes a dowel tool. I don't really like it, but I think you get that for about $200. I do have that, but I don't really use that really, except for tabletop glue ups, and that's a whole other story. So these go together pretty well, and I'm satisfied. And I will clamp them up and let them sit for a little bit before we go into the next steps. So here I just run a little chamfer with the router on all 4 legs of the table and just do a little light sanding before we go into put the level feet on, which I just mark a center point on each leg bottom. And so now we are going to use a 5/16 inch drill bit, and I mark it off a piece of tape, the depth that I want, and then we will use a 1-inch Forstner bit to kind of hollow out the center part. That way you can hide the level feet a little better if you need to. In the end, we didn't end up needing these feet because the floor was level at the customer's house and went together well. But it's good practice to have these just in case. You never know if you make a mistake with your project build, or a house floor, where depending on where it's going, could be not level, and could give you headaches when you get on site. So here I'm going back to the top pieces, and I'm going to use a big straight edge square, level, for just to use as a reference for lamination. I don't want any open joints on this, and sometimes with these longer pieces, even with a jointer and a table saw, it's hard to get them to be perfect. So I'm going to joint and plane one more time for the final glue up and make sure everything's nice and straight before we do final glue up. This is a bigger table, especially wide pieces, so this will be glued up in 3 sections. Well, 2 sections to start, and then I'll do a final glue up later. And I'm also going to be using a biscuit joiner for this. So this will be a multi-step process here for this tabletop. So here it's just glue, biscuits, and clamps. And like I said, this will be glued up in 2 halves right now, and then we will do a final glue up with the full table later. So I'm also using some cauls here to help keep everything nice and level. The biscuits do a pretty good job of that, but you know, when it's this wide, I'm going to make sure. So it definitely helps keep everything nice and level. Also, as you see, I'm going to throw some wood dust in some of the little joints with some glue just to make sure everything looks nice and sealed, and any imperfections will be covered by that and squared up. In my opinion, it's also important to have a nice even clamp pressure. You don't want to over tighten it, and you also want to have some top and bottom clamps and let them sit. So these will sit overnight, and then we will do a final glue up the next morning. Nice and tight. So while I have the biscuit joiner out, I'm going to use the biscuit joiner to put my slots in for my tabletop fasteners for both benches and the table. So you can also use a table saw for this, or even a router bit, but I like to use the biscuit joiner, and it's set for that right now. So here I'm the next morning after I glued up tabletop final. I'm cutting the final length. So now the table is cut the final length, and now I'm going to do a lot of sanding. So I start out with a big belt sander with 80 grit, and then I will work up to about, on this table, I will work up to about 320 grit. So this is what this step now. So I'm just doing a lot of sanding, everybody's favorite part of tabletops. So here I'm mixing up some Total Boat epoxy with some hardener. It's a 2-to-1 mix, and I'm just going to mix this up and add a little black dye for the bottom of the table. There's like a little, not a little, but it's a kind of an elongated knot, almost like a little bark showing. So I'm just going to fill this in, and because it also extends to the edge of the table, so I don't want that being exposed. I know people don't always look at the bottom of the table, but still, this also helps secure it too, so it doesn't grow or loosen up over time. So as you can see, it's a little bit of a long, almost like a live edge bark piece to a certain extent on the bottom of that one wider board. So we're just going to put some epoxy in there, heat up, and let it sit, for a day or so. So here I'm going to start milling up the top pieces for both benches. These benches are going to be approximately 12 inches wide, so I'm going to cut up 2 pieces at about 6 inches each, and then we will laminate them. So this is the step we're at now. The bench tops are laminating. I'll let them sit for a few hours, maybe overnight, and flip the top back over. Once the epoxy dries, I'll let that dry overnight. Route the edges and sand the benches, tables one more time, and then get ready to paint. So here I'm going to use my sprayer. It's a little cheap sprayer I get from Harbor Freight. Just hooked up to my air compressor. I'm using some white primer paint mix. I use about 3 coats. I do thin it out with a little bit of water, about 10% water in it, the mix. So it gives it a nice little color, but you can also see the grain a little bit too, which most of my clients like. So here, as you can see, I'm going to start finishing up the top for both benches and the tabletop with sanding to about 320 grit, and I'm also going to route around over on each edge. So this project almost done. As you can see, I'm doing final sanding, and then I'm also going to be staining the tops of the benches. And the table with a weathered gray. I don't go real heavy with it. It kind of gives it a gray beige look. Um, and it seems like the clients really like this. I actually like it too. It comes out pretty nice because it has a kind of a beachy plus, a farmhouse look to it. Depending on the angle, it looks like a gray angle or it looks gray from one angle, it looks beige from another angle. So it looks pretty cool when it's done. So it's almost like one of those cars they paint like it looks silver from one angle, then looks like say pink from another angle or green. So this order's pretty much done, and now I'm going to be mounting the tabletops. Tabletops go together with some speed squares here, and um, as you see, I have the slots that I used earlier with the biscuit joiner, and I'm going to be putting the tabletop fasteners on with that. With these tabletop fasteners are very important because they allow for wood movement, because the wood is constantly moving with different um, temperature changes and humidity especially. So I put these brackets in. I don't over tighten. I just use a self-centering drill bit to countersink, and then I use self-centering, self-tapping. I want to say they're like 1 inch screws. I don't go too tight though, because I want these to be able to slide with seasonal wood movement. So this order is pretty much done now. Once I do this, I do put a little coat of polyurethane on these. I don't put the Osmo or anything else because the client's going to put glass on the tabletop. As you can see, I'm also putting little felt feet on the bottom of the legs for the benches for moving in and out. Oh, they don't scratch the floors up. So this project's pretty much done. It came out real nice. The client seemed to like it. They actually ordered 2 more benches for each end rather than chairs. So that would be I'm going to add on to that. So it came out pretty nice. I hope you like. Hope it helps. Comment if you like. Subscribe if you even like. Thanks.